Hello, I'm Helen Bradley and welcome to this video tutorial. And today what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at someone else's image. One of my viewers sent me 3 images that they took in their backyard and asked me, was there anything that they could do with them or should they just be trashed? Well, let's step through these images. In this image, the first thing that caught my attention obviously is the statue in the middle of the garden. And there are some possibilities in the light coming through the fence. In this image, it's basically just a look at the seat here, and there wasn't much of anything that I thought was inspiring. I could have done with a bit more of the tree, and perhaps the tree against the sky might have been worth working on, but there's really not enough of anything to work with this image. And then this image is another shot of this statue. And again, we've got light coming through the brick wall here, but I'm a little bit concerned about what's happening behind the statue. There's a little bit too much to get rid of to actually be bothered working with this image. So of the 3 of them, this one is certainly the one with the most potential. Now my viewer sent me both the raw image and the JPEG, but because the JPEG was already partially adjusted, I've actually opted to use that because it's a little bit easier to see what's going on in the JPEG version. The first thing I'm going to do is crop this image, and I'm going to take a hatchet to it. So what I'm going to do is get rid of everything I don't want. And we're going to focus in on just the statue, and I'm going to get rid of all the light behind. So I just want the wall to be the background for this image. And I'm going to come even a little bit closer. Now this crop isn't set in concrete. I can adjust it later on, but I really don't want to be seeing any of the image that I don't plan to work with. So the starting point for the image is just to have a look at some basic adjustments, just to see what I can get out of the little girl herself. So I'm going to increase the exposure just a little bit on this image, and I'm going to start bringing down the shadows because I actually want the shadows to disappear. I want the entire lawn to disappear. And I'm just going to have a look at highlights. I might actually just kick the highlights up a little bit. But basically everything I'm going to do from now on is going to involve the tools up here, the tools that we can use to adjust parts of the image. I'm going to start with the graduated filter, and I'm just going to drag it up from the bottom of the image just to try and darken this foreground area. And I'm just going to drop the exposure because I want to get rid of the grass. But I still like a little bit of this tree detail. So there's a little bit of light and dark here, just not nearly as much as we had earlier. Now, if you're working with the most recent versions of Lightroom, I'm just going to go and pick up this graduated filter. What you can do now is you can add or subtract areas from the impact of the graduated filter. So I'm going to the brush tool, and I'm going to increase the size of my brush, drop down the feather a bit so it's got a fairly harsh edge, and I'm going to add this area to the graduated filter. So what's happening here is that the area that I'm painting on is being affected by the graduated filter settings. So that just allows me to add some extra bits to the filter. Now as I come around, I'm going to start decreasing the brush size. I'm just doing that with the open square bracket key. That just allows me to reduce the brush size. I can use the closed square bracket key to enlarge it. I want to come in as close as I can. Now if you were doing this yourself, you would be a little bit more careful than I'm doing. I'm just trying to get to the end product just to show you the sorts of potential that you have here. I want to use some of this backlighting, so I actually want the statue to be lit. I just don't want the grass to be seen. So let's go and click done here. I still haven't killed the grass nearly enough, so I'm going back this time with the adjustment brush, increase the size using the open and closed square bracket keys again. Target it onto the image. I need to pin it down. I'm going to start dropping the exposure, although you can change this setting before or after you brush on, or as you're doing it, and then you can just wind it back. It's fully editable. This is too much over here, so I'm just going to press Control or Command Z to just undo it. I think I can only adjust this side of the grass in the image with this particular adjustment. Now I think there's a little bit too much saturation in there, so I'm going to drop the saturation down as well. And then come in here with, again, another adjustment, again, trying to kill this grass area a bit, just darken it a little bit. Now, exposure is not the only tool that you can use with these areas. You can also drop down the contrast a little bit to flatten it. You can drop down the shadows to darken the shadows a little bit. So you have some other options apart from just hitting it with lack of exposure or less exposure. I'm just going to come around the back here and try and get rid of a little bit of this detail. Okay, the next thing I want to get rid of is this light coming through the wall here. So I'm going to have to get in here, and I've got my sizing here scaled right down. So I'm actually going to bring it up to a 2:1 size to get into this area. And I need to get rid of this light source here. So I'm going to the spot removal tool. Just going to size down my brush a little bit, and we can just paint over it. So I'm going to be very careful that I don't touch the statue's head, but that I do get rid of the entire light source coming through this brick wall. Now, Lightroom's not very helpfully suggested that her hair might be a good fix. Of course, that's not a good fix. It's a terrible fix. But I'm going to go back and find something that is a much better fix. We're getting a little bit of blue light coming off her head, but I'm just going to opt for finding a good brick to fix this with first. And click done. Now we could come back with the spot healing brush tool again at a much smaller size. I'm just going to start sweeping in here and see if I can take this piece out and just darken it a little bit. This is pretty good. Probably if you had access to Photoshop, you might actually take it to Photoshop to do that area in Photoshop. But for now, I'm just going to call that good. I don't think that you'll see that area in particular once we get the other effects onto the image. Now, before I start bringing in some light from this source here, I've got a piece of garden equipment down here. So let's just go and get rid of that. Same tool, spot removal tool, just drag over it and click done, and it's removed. You don't want anything particularly bright in the garden area here because you don't want the viewer's eye to be drawn to it. So if there's anything bright, any sort of bright leaves or anything, just get rid of those because they're not helping you at all. So next thing is the adjustment brush. I'm going to bring light in from this brick here. So I want a nice big brush, and I want a pretty good feather on it because I want this to sort of peter out at the edges. So just so we can see what we're doing, I'm going to crank the exposure up before I start. That's the only setting that I'm going to have on here is just exposure. So I'm going to click to pin this down, making sure I don't have auto mask selected, and I'm going to bring in some light. Too much light, but I can scale that back in a minute. So I'm going to bring in, with as steady a hand as I can, some nice streaks of light, as if light were pouring in from this location here. Now in a minute I'm also going to bring some light in from this front area, but let's just back this light source off because it's a little bit hefty. But we do want a bit of light in there. And if you want to color your light, you can color it a couple of ways. Either you can change the temperature of it so that you're bringing in some yellow light because you don't want blue, but you could. This is a blue yellow slider here, so we could color it a little bit yellow. You can also color it green or magenta because this is the tint slider and that switches between magenta and green. What you can't do with these sliders is you can't bring in the two missing colors, which are cyan and red, but you can get them here with the color option. So if you wanted to bring in cyan or red, you just come in here and select a red color, for example. Let's go for red more than magenta. Dial down the saturation, and that way you're coloring your light coming in from the brick wall. So there is a possibility of choosing one of 4 colors here or any color in the spectrum from the color option. So it looks like I actually didn't get that red color in at all. So let's just see how we would bring in a little bit of red. When you see this box without the X in it, you know that you've got a color applied with that particular adjustment. So I'm going to click OK. And let's go and bring in some light just in here from the bottom, from an unspecified light source, if you like. So I'm just going to click to pin it down, and then just a couple of bursts of light. Now you can either adjust the exposure up so you can see where you're putting the light in, or you can click here to show the selected mask overlay so you can see what's being lit and what isn't being lit. And obviously with this pin selected, it's too much of an exposure adjustment, so I'm just going to dial that back a bit. And again, I want to bring a little bit of color in with that because it's much more interesting when the light is colored. I think a vignette will help this image. A vignette is going to darken the edges, and we're going to get to that down here in the effects area. So I'm going to choose a highlight priority vignette, and with the amount, we're just going to back it off. If we go in a negative direction, we're going to darken. If we went in a positive direction, we would lighten it. Well, we want a little bit of darkening around the edge. Again, just to bring our eye into the center of this image, and I'll click done. I may want to light her face a little bit better, which I could do with, say, something like the radial filter. I can just drag a radial filter adjustment over her face. Now, what's happened here is the radial filter can go in one of two ways, where it's affecting outside the filter area or inside it. Well, it looks to me like it's affecting the outside. Now, we want to flip that around, so I'll invert the mask, and now I can just choose a sort of adjustment here. With or without a feather. I'm going to choose quite a big feather, just something to light her face just a little bit more than it is right now. Now you could also take this to a fantasy level and have a look at this element here and perhaps light that separately or do some color work on that. So I'm just going to come in here and actually paint over it. Rather strangely, as I do that, the entire image is wiggling as if we're having an earthquake. We're not, but that's very, very strange. I haven't seen that happen before. Okay, let's add a little bit of pink color into here. Now we could also apply a bit of a glow around here. So let's go back to the adjustment brush. Let's pin it down a little bit over here to the side. Just make sure that you get a second pin in. And let's go and add this sort of slightly glowing effect here. Very disconcerting that this image has got the wiggles. I'm going to turn off the show selected mask overlay so I can just see what's happening here, and I'm just going to increase the exposure a little bit just to give us that sort of glow effect. So let's have a look at the image as it was. We can go to the before by pressing the / key. This is the cropped version of the image, and if I click the / key again, this is how we've been able to relight it and make it just a little bit more of an interesting image. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you'll be alerted when new videos are released. But also, if you have an image and if you would like me to edit your image, please send it to me. I'll have a look at it, and if it's inspirational, I can do something cool with it, then I will do that and I will make a video for that image. So thank you very much to Kim, who very kindly sent me those 3 images to choose from and who gave me the opportunity to show you a potential edit to a sort of everyday image to make it into something a little bit more special. Until next time, my name's Helen Bradley. Thank you so much for joining me on my YouTube channel.